Greetings, everyone. I'm Jeff Carter. I go by he, him. I'm with Seattle CityClub. Welcome to this webinar on the homelessness crisis, part 2 of the Civic Boot Camp on housing instability. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that Seattle CityClub is a small nonprofit with a big mission: to strengthen our community through conversations with communities on critical topics like this one, and encourage civic engagement. So please consider supporting us to continue programs like these by making a donation on our website, seattlecityclub.org. We at Seattle City Club value healthy dialogue and debate and want to provide a safe and welcoming space for all to contribute. So in order to do this, we have established community standards for webinar communications, and we will not tolerate threats of violence, profanity, or hate speech. Those who violate our standards will lose the privilege of attending this webinar. So with that, I would like to welcome our panelists for today. And invite you to share your pronouns if you wish. We have Maureen Ewing, Executive Director with the University Heights Center. Chris Park, the Metropolitan Improvement District Outreach Manager for the Downtown Seattle Association. Dawn Whitson, Outreach Case Manager for Reach and Evergreen Treatment Services. And Theresa Barker, Community Organizer with Ravenna Cowan Neighborhood Association. So if you could take just a minute to summarize what you and your organization does, what area to cover, who do you serve, your top priorities, et cetera. So Dawn, how about we start with you?
Sure. My name is Dawn Whitson. I'm an outreach case manager with Reach. I use she, her pronouns. I specifically work in the Georgetown area, but Reach as a whole is an agency, grassroots agency. We're a nonprofit. We work with our most vulnerable community members that are living unsheltered right now. So people who have acute medical needs, folks who have acute legal issues, folks who are chronically using substances, and folks who are chronically homeless. LEAD is also a part of our organization, which is the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program. Most of the work that we do is a client-centered approach for harm reduction, meeting clients where they're at. I spend most of my days out in encampments, trying to coordinate services for folks, help people identify what their needs are, and then connect them to those resources. We do a lot of intensive case management at Reach. I do a lot of light case management out in the field, and connecting folks with medical services, MAT services for substance use disorder, helping people, get signed up for food stamps or access any of their other entitlement benefits. I think the most important part of the work that we do is just letting folks know that we see them, that they are not alone, and building a relationship with them so that they have somebody to sort of hold their hand and help them to figure out what it is that they want for their life. So just honoring their sense of autonomy and letting them know that we're available if and when they are ready to reach out and ask for help.
Great, thanks, Dawn. Chris, how about you? Chris, are you there?
Sorry, unmute. Sorry, I was muted.
That's okay.
Yeah, we are a assertive street-based outreach team that operates primarily in downtown Seattle. Our service area covers on the north end up to Denny Way, south end to, I'll call it the north parking lot of CenturyLink Field, and the I-5 corridor and the waterfront. So it's about 285 square blocks of downtown Seattle that we cover. The primary neighborhoods are Belltown, Pioneer Square, Denny Triangle, Downtown Core, and Waterfront. Services that we offer is engaging folks who appear to be experiencing homelessness, getting them connected to services, helping individuals get Washington State ID, getting connected to medical benefits, mental health treatment, substance use treatment, and helping folks with shelter referrals to employment, and hopefully permanent housing at the end of it. Our primary demographic are individuals 18 or older. We don't work with families. We will work with couples, but 18 to, I think our oldest client we have right now is 75 years old. So that's our demographic.
Great, thank you. How about you, Maureen?
Thanks, Jeff. Good afternoon. I'm Maureen Ewing. My pronouns are she and her, and I've been the executive director at the University Heights Center since early 2014. And since then, our city has declared a homelessness crisis in 15, and then the upzone was passed in the U District in 2017. And so in some ways, we're kind of an untraditional service provider because we're a nonprofit community center that formed in 1990 when the U Heights School was closed on 50th and the Ave. Some of you may know that as where the farmers market is, but what happens during the weekdays is that we're a home for a dozen community organizations, childcare, housing displacement advocacy groups. We have an arts and culture program. But when our neighborhood really started to shift, and even though the U District has been home, particularly for youth who are unhoused, it was right on our doorstep. It was our neighbors that were being impacted. And so we started partnering with Roots and groups like that, local service providers, to do a youth employment program, and brought those youth on our staff and offered life training skills classes in partnership from the U Heights Center. And then that evolved to do more. We wanted to do more. So a couple years ago, we started doing research on safe lots and opened up one of those during the pandemic with Urban League and the U Temple Church. And I'll go into more detail later on what that is. And then we're really a hub for different services to come and offer basic needs for people who are unhoused. So U District Street Medicine offers basic health assessments twice a month from our park. We've got a food truck that comes 4 times a week that gives out free meals. It's about 400 meals a week being given out. And the UW Black Lives Matter Club is also giving free meals out every Sunday. We're gonna soon be home to a community Seattle Fridge, which is a new mutual aid program. I think will be the 4th one that is the community comes together and donates perishable food, and then it's available to people who are unhoused in the neighborhood. We also, a big part of our advocacy has been around working to get more hygiene services available in the U District. And we are one of the sites that provides porta potties, hand washing stations, including the Seattle Street Sink, which is a really neat project. Let's see if I covered. And then just this year, we took on the fiscal sponsorship of a vehicle residency outreach program that's been serving Seattle since 2011. And that is a group of outreach workers that go out and work with people that are either living in their RVs and vehicles.
Great. Thanks, Maureen. And Theresa, how about you?
Hello, I'm Theresa Barker. I am, my pronouns are she and her. I'm an organizer for a group we're calling, that we call ourselves the Ravenna Cowan Park Community Alliance. So it's just a grassroots group that I started and reached out to my neighbors and we banded together on all sides of Ravenna Park to really advocate for the elimination of homelessness and in the same time protecting Seattle parks and green spaces, which were being, especially Ravenna Park, was really being highly impacted. So it got us involved. So over the past 4 years, we have been working with city representatives to address problems of homelessness in our parks and in our larger community. We see firsthand the heartbreak and the distress of those living outdoors. Currently, we're advocating urgently for much needed supported shelters, permanent supportive housing and wraparound services. And basically we've just been meeting with and advocating to city representatives the importance that we really need this problem addressed, and we need support for those who are living outdoors and not just turning our backs on them. We're a city, we have a vision. We're a city that feels we can do this, and we just can't turn our backs on those in need. We have a vision of that all those who suffer from homelessness will be lodged and cared for now, not 5 years down the road. And we want to know, we're in the process of learning what is holding up the necessary abundance of shelter and permanent supportive housing. So I'd say over the last 4 years, we have learned what works, largely from meeting with the Third Door Coalition and Professor Sarah Rankin, and evidence. So I'm an engineer by training, and so permanent supportive housing is what the evidence points to. That, and we've heard this from DESC, from REACH, from the PDA, the legal defense, the legal defense guys. And also, Jeff, I'll say from last week's Housing Boot Camp session, now I'm including government support of affordable housing being one of those things that works as well. I think Stephen said last week that we've now demonstrated the free market economy does not support continuing with affordable housing in the scale that's needed. So what we want to know is what it will take to implement these proven solutions in a timely basis so that the suffering can be ended. And that's
Great.
it.
Thank you. Thank you. And that's what we're going to hopefully touch on today and next week with elected officials at our next third boot camp. But I'd like to go ask all of you to kind of briefly give us the context, starting with you, Dawn, because you're all in different neighborhoods. What are the trends you're seeing in terms of homelessness, people experiencing homelessness in your neighborhood, and how has the pandemic kind of impacted that? And what are the needs that you see people face right now?
I keep having to go first. Okay, so
Sorry.
I would say in the last couple of years, an overwhelming trend has just been sort of an increase in like visibility for our folks. The navigation team, when they were doing city sweeps, what I spent most of my time sort of following behind that and trying to recover the damages and deal with sort of the trauma that was created as a result of that, replacing IDs, trying to replace people's clothing or hygiene. Obviously, there has been a widespread need for shelter placement or shelter options that are appealing to folks. So our congregate setting shelters of the past have not been conducive to both the mental health and they just haven't been options that have been appealing to folks for a lot of different reasons. No privacy, lots of people in a very small space, lots of theft, bed bugs, lice, a lot of folks being victimized in those locations. So most of my clients, even when there have been congregate shelter spaces available, and this is even in the enhanced shelters, they would rather stay outside where they have a little bit of privacy and a sense of what is theirs. One of the things that I've been happy for, or grateful for at least, is that with COVID, it seems to have forced the city to do something different. So the new shelter spaces that just started taking referrals on Wednesday of this week, some of the other hotel spaces that like DESC started using with the Red Lion down in Renton, have been so much more stabilizing for people that have been trying to get inside. And I think that this model is going to prove to us that it works a lot better in terms of getting folks the wraparound services that they need for mental health and medical care and substance use disorder. Those are the things that I think that are critical in conjunction with the overwhelming need for housing for people. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I hope that it goes without saying that housing is the single most important thing that we have to start with, but that it does not end there, and that the quality of the services provided and the quality of and the caliber of the folks providing those services is also really a key element to whether or not folks are successful. So with COVID, we've seen the shutdown of a lot of other services. And I know that those of us who have still stayed out in the streets and in encampments have sort of had to increase our workload trying to get around, having the Department of Licensing closed and DSHS closed and the Social Security office closed and all those things that folks used to be able to try to access on their own. in person because most of our clients don't have phones for any length of time anyway. So I think that we've seen some things that have come out of COVID that are good. And I think that if we can keep moving forward with that and gain some traction, seeing, this has been an opportunity, I feel like, for us to see some models like the Just Cares program that Reach was partnering with the PDA, have really shown, like the data has shown that these programs are working. They're just they are more costly to do. And I think that the long-term solutions for these are going to need to have like a longer vision, as everyone else has mentioned earlier. So yeah, that's pretty much where our needs are at. With COVID shutting down and allowing people to shelter in place, we haven't had to spend quite as much time trying to replace the things that are just basic that folks were getting thrown away before. So that's also been pretty nice.
Thank you. Thank you. Chris, how about you working downtown? What trends have you seen, and what can you add to what Dawn has already mentioned?
Yeah, I think Dawn covered a lot of it. A lot of the work that we both do overlap. We often coordinate care for the same individuals and different things of that nature. I think one of the things that I've noticed a trend as of late is we're seeing a lot more younger folks than we normally would in downtown. Since COVID has happened recently, there was a large encampment in downtown. And I remember as we were doing a joint outreach with Catholic Community Services and Reach, we were all kind of taken back by that the average age of that encampment was somewhere between 25 to 27, which we had not seen that in a very long time. I think there are some factors that could explain that, with obviously due to COVID, a lot of normal public spaces where individuals in that age range would normally hang out at are closed due to COVID-19. It's kind of forcing some folks to be seeking things downtown. I think one of the things that's interesting too is, and I agree with the housing first approach, but we also have to treat the whole person, not simply meet the most immediate need. There are often folks that we come across who might be staying in a tent in downtown, but they're actually housed. They already have an apartment. The reason why they're not staying in that apartment is they're lonely or their friends are still outside. And so that's where they feel connection and belonging. And so while I completely agree with my colleagues that we do need more affordable housing, permanent supportive housing, all those factors, we also do need other services to help people to feel connected and to not simply feel that they're stuck in a room with four walls. We still are seeing high, what we call dual diagnosis individuals who are suffering from chronic persistent mental illness and also struggling with substance use as well. That seems to be a fairly popular trend. And then just also, we deal with a lot of folks who, and I really appreciate Don highlighting this, the caliber of service that we're able to offer folks. I think sometimes we forget that people tend to not want to come inside or engage with social services is because they've already experienced that and it didn't go well, and that's something that I think we need to be empathetic and understanding too. And some of the work that Dawn and my team does is sometimes it takes months to repair the damage that may have been done there, where someone slipped through the cracks, and to build that trust. So it's not going to be a quick, easy solution. I think as we look at the issues of homelessness, we have to remember this is a very complex issue. It's not a technical issue. It's not like restarting our iPhone or restarting your computer to solve it.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Chris. How about Theresa, in the Ravenna Cowan neighborhood? What are the trends you're seeing?
Thanks. By the way, Chris and Don, I'm really grateful for the organization's works that you're doing, and on behalf of my entire community, on behalf of the city, it's amazing. I would say a couple things. Let me just mention that we think the key challenges are obviously resources, supported shelter with wraparound services, permanent supportive housing. We have heard again and again from DESC, from Reach, and from the PDA that those living outdoors welcome and actually seek shelter and support. rather than the public perception that can be there that they're just lazy and not getting their lives together. And that it needs to be done with compassion. So not just shunting people into some convenient place, but actually working with them on what they need. We've come to the conclusion, I'll say, because there's been a lot of anger and frustration in the community, not understanding the problem, that clearing doesn't solve, it re-traumatizes, and it sends those in need into hiding. We also are very aware, right now there's some very challenging encampments, 20 feet, 50 feet from our windows. So challenges for everyone involved in an encampment. Presence of crime, which the homeless are preyed on as much or more as anybody else, of course. There's no lock on a tent door. Cold, lack of hygiene services, no stability for people who have jobs, medical appointment needs, cooking, food, laundry. None of that is there present in an encampment. The unauthorized ones, and just the trauma of suffering. There's an impact, a huge impact on those who are subject to these conditions, and we're also experiencing it secondhand because we can't do anything. We have to just watch these things happen. A few days ago, over in front of Cowan Park, there was a young man who collapsed. One of our neighbors went over and asked him before he collapsed if he needed help. He collapsed, and he said no. Collapsed, and this neighbor reported calling 911 and no one would come because he wasn't related to the person. This is just a report that I heard, but we're just at a distance, so we've really become involved as much as we can. We have a group of us that puts on a weekly meal, and provides additional supplies called the Ravenna pop-up kitchen every week for the last 2.5 years at the 65th Park and Ride. But mostly all we can do is just continue to agitate with and advocate with our elected representatives. So under COVID, one of the things that Dawn and Chris mentioned is it's made homelessness visible all over the city. So even in along some of the other, are some not necessarily just Ravenna, but over in Laurelhurst, they're starting to see it along the Burt Gilman Trail. And because they can't be in shelters anymore, we see it, people are understanding it more, people are more interested in, who haven't been before, in getting the problem solved. There have actually been a couple of unexpected sort of silver linings, in my opinion, just speaking, isn't necessarily shared by my entire community, but in our parks particular, without clearings of the NAV team in the Parks Department, people began to camp in the open. They began to camp on already cleared spaces. Parks can then engage them because they can find them and they can ask them to do litter cleanup, which is a huge, huge benefit to not further creating a public safety hazard in the creek with human waste and so on. They also can offer outreach services because, again, they're there out in the open, and it actually reduces damage to sensitive park environment, especially for Ravenna Park with the really steep slopes. We've had people camp under, dig out a human-sized cave under a large big leaf maple. We've had people actually dug into the hillsides and lowering themselves down with ropes, and all of that is very, very difficult for the park to recover from once even those are addressed. And so that hasn't been happening. We learned recently about the Just Care program. We would love to see this implemented all over, and mainly because it's culturally sensitive approach and that multiple services were needed. I remember hearing the presentation, and Dawn and Chris, I'm sure you know about this, but the 165 individuals that were interviewed there in Chinatown and Pioneer Square in the International District, that 95% of them needed housing. And then another huge percent needed just medical support. Another huge percent needed legal issues, in addition to the behavioral health issues and other things. And it's just so heartrending to hear that the need is there, but then to see it paired with a cultural resource for that person, depending on what they needed, is just, as an engineer, that seems like a really effective way to do it. And we're looking in our community at how we can advocate to bring that style of program everywhere in the city where it's needed. And that's part of the reason I'm here, and part of the reason I came last week to the to the housing issue.
Theresa, sorry to interrupt, but could you really briefly describe what the Just Cares program is?
Oh, sure. And I don't know, Dawn, I don't know if you know more about this, but I just went to the town hall put on by, led by Councilmember Lewis, a couple of months ago. And so what I understand it was is last fall, the International District in the Pioneer Square area, community organizations like mine and business organizations advocated for not for clearing of all the tents that were on the sidewalk, but for the those living outdoors to be lodged and cared for. And that I believe it was funded by the Act, it was externally funded. And the service providers came in and interviewed 165 individuals and asked them what they would need, just as Chris and Dawn have talked about with their work. And then my understanding is that hotel rooms were identified and for shelter, and that there was a cultural resource always associated with it. So if you had an Asian heritage and background, there would be someone there to provide you, and I want to say 24/7 on site. If you're Native American, which a huge proportion, outlying proportion of our homeless relative to the percentage in the general population are in that homeless population, which is just horrid. And that I don't know how many of those 165, but a huge number of those 165 were served and moved off the street and moved into the shelter offered. I also heard anecdotally last week from Andrew Lewis, because he came and spoke to us about the It Takes a Village legislation. It was so poignant that when they did the clearing at Denny Park, that they had done outreach for months, and they had spaces for all 12 individuals that they were willing to go to. And on the day they went to clear it, there were 20 people there because they had come from elsewhere hoping for offers of shelter. And I mean, people want shelter. I mean, it's easy to assume on the outside that they're choosing to live this way, and we've just learned over time that there's a much more greater story to that. And then we continue to see the suffering firsthand. So it's really challenging. Last night we met with Lehigh to hear more about the U District Tiny House Village, and we're just trying to help clear some of the bottlenecks with that, because we know that tiny house villages are very we're hearing they're very welcomed as one alternative. There needs to be different kinds of shelter, I understand that, but that in general, the tiny house village is often, when offered, is taken up. So we wanted to just learn more about that and what we can do.
Great.
So hopefully that filled in some of the blanks there.
Thanks, Theresa. I'd like to, speaking of University Heights or University District, I'd like to jump to Maureen. The same kind of question? What trends have you seen in the last, during the pandemic, in terms of homelessness and the needs that people are facing?
So, just to echo what the other panelists have said, the pandemic has essentially highlighted and exacerbated the inequities that were already present, due to unaffordable housing and capitalism and all those things. And so, what Dawn said is like, we need more housing, but that's not the only solution that we need. We need a menu of different services. And I don't want to duplicate what the other panelists have said, but particularly around hygiene services, during the pandemic, there is no running water. And there was nowhere to use the restroom, and it's humiliating for people who need to find a restroom. Not only for people who are unhoused. I went on a ride along with an amazing outreach worker, Jen Adams, who works for the Scofflaw Mitigation Program, and we couldn't find a restroom in South Seattle, and it's a problem. And so I also chair the BIA, the Business Improvement Area, and we actually measure biohazards every month. And last March, there was a 5.5 increase in biohazards along the Ave and on Brooklyn, over 1,000. And I'm talking human waste and needles. So it's a public health issue. This is not just an issue that impacts people who are unhoused. And I think Dawn said this, and that there's been more services as a result of the pandemic, and we have more hygiene centers that are temporary in the U District, but we can't lose those. These were needs before the pandemic, and they're worse now. And during the ride along, I found out that there is an outbreak of Shigella, which I picked up in Colombia. It is no fun, but when you don't have access to a bathroom or antibiotics, it will kill you. You will get dehydrated. And these are what that people are dealing with without access to basic care. And then around vehicle residents, they've been shuffled around. And, just the word vehicle residents, we don't call ourselves house residents, it's like people living in their cars. They've been shuffled around, and there's been a trend of increasing numbers. And so in 2010, during the point in time count, which we know those counts are typically underrepresentations, there was 590 that we counted living in their cars. And now there's, I think the highest recently was around 3,400 people even living in their cars and vehicles. And so that's a huge increase. And so even though the numbers of people living in their cars are increasing, the response has been punitive. So the number of ordinances, parking ordinances that more affect people living in their cars than the general public, they get more tickets. Those are increasing. There's a great report. I know with the poll, we asked for like evidence-based solutions called Living at the Intersection through the Seattle School of Law in Sarangan that talks about these ordinances across the country and across the state. In Seattle at that time, the report was written in 2016, had the most ordinances. It was 20 at the time. And because of the pandemic, we lifted the 72-hour parking rule. So things that may seem like inconveniences to us, like 2-hour parking, maybe not the 72-hour parking as much. You can't park here from 2 to 5 a.m. Those are all targeting people who were living in their cars, making it difficult for them to remain in a place for very long. But there are no other alternatives. There are about 18 spots available through the Safe Lot program, which we'll talk more about, which is a pilot program through Human Services Division. So it's really unethical for us to be ticketing folks, and there's nowhere else for them to go. And one of the gentlemen I met this week, he grew up in Ballard. He went to high school in Ballard. He wanted to park across the street from his mother used to live, and these are their homes. And so to shuffle people around like that is really unethical and cruel. So those are some of the trends that we're seeing around vehicle residents. And I know we're not to solutions, but we have areas where people are congregating them. And if we could surround them with trash pickup and hygiene services, that would go a long way. Let's see. And then just in the U district itself, and I know the other panelists touched on this, there's people with mental health crisis, I think, are more visible. And it's been difficult on small businesses that are already struggling to manage. But what's interesting is that when I talked to David Delgado, who's with the REACH program, who's had a huge positive impact in the U district in providing a humane relationship and pathway for folks to more services, that those programs really work. It's the person-centered programs. But when I talked to him, he said 2 to 5% of the U district homeless population are actually the people that you see on the street. And what I'm afraid of is that when people see, that one person having a breakdown, they're associating that with all people who are unhoused. And it's certainly not a homogenous group. And so we need lots of different solutions. And he was complaining about the fact that even if you can get through to somebody to the point where they're open to being in housing, there's a 6 to 9 month wait. And so then what do we do with the people that are left on the street while we're waiting?
Mm-hmm. Maureen, I'd like to stick with you. I know that you worked with a business association, and I know there's a lot of concerns out there from homeowners living near parks and businesses impacted by people living in tents near their business. How have you worked with businesses and like residents to kind of address homelessness?
Well, so from the BIA and the U District partnership, we've implemented 2 new programs that Don knows better than me, but the REACH program has made a huge difference. I mean, even just because we're not just a homeless service provider at U Heights, but being able to call on REACH when we're having someone having a mental health crisis, or the ambassador program is also another program and an alternative to calling 911, where these folks are trained if somebody's having an overdose or those kinds of things to be able to react. And so then small businesses, we're not always relying on 911 or law enforcement that either, can't prioritize that call and can't show up, or they're not the best response. They're not trained to deal with a mental health crisis. And the other suggestion that I had heard from the community is that we should be able, the reach workers and other outreach workers should be able to call on the mobile health crisis team without having to go through law enforcement to do that, which makes a lot of sense, is that these mental health workers, they know these populations and they know the resources. Why do we have to have law enforcement in the mix if there's not a threat? And just to tell a story, we've got, children playing in the playground, and then there's illicit behavior happening next door in the park. And a lot of times, sometimes it's an unsafe situation, but a lot of times it's not. And then if we have a reach worker David come and talk to us and talk to the parents and provide services to the person having a crisis, it's made all the difference. It's such a shift from 5 years ago before we've had these programs.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Theresa, the same kind of question. How do you work with the local neighborhoods and association, dealing with parks and such?
So I would say Maureen did a great job of advocating for more information. I actually reached out to Maureen because, as a business group, they're adjacent to where our community lives. And one of the things that was really awesome is when I spoke to so Maureen, it's your clean and safe program, and then there's an outreach worker associated with that was hired that actually meets these folks on the street. And this so poignant story was that a business owner had someone camping by their dumpster in their alley, and they called this outreach worker and said, "You got to come and take care of this." The outreach worker spoke with the person who was outdoors and found out his name, found out what was going on. This was like a Friday. He said he had a medical appointment Tuesday, offered to take him to the medical appointment, and then went back to the business owner and said, "Hey, this is who this is. He just needs support for a couple more days. Can you just let him camp in your alley?" And the business owner was more than compliant, more than happy to do that. And so the more information, and just speaking also for our group, was we've learned more. It's just helped us to be a lot more understanding. If this was a simple problem, we would have solved it already, right? And it's just very complicated. So it's not what it looks like on the surface. And a lot of Seattle housed residents haven't really been aware of that until now. And then just the ability to take some kind of action. So, for example, I have simply asked my community, my organization, to just figure out whatever your opinion is. Is it, the parks need to be protected no matter what? Or is it that people who are currently urinating and defecating at 15th Avenue Northeast and Ravenna Boulevard, because there's no other place for them to do that, shouldn't be there? That shouldn't be occurring because it's a public health hazard for them and for the surrounding people. Whatever their opinion is, we need to tell it to the city council, we need to tell it to the mayor, we need to tell it to city representatives. And then when they take action like that, some do direct service through the Ravenna pop-up kitchen and other helping build the tiny house homes and so on, it creates a sense of being engaged and reduces that sense of hopelessness, helplessness, anger, and frustration. Mm-hmm. So that would be, I think, Maureen, especially, you're both a service provider and you've got vulnerable population there. So that's put you in a really interesting position to understand that. And so what we see is that we just need to, I have actually reached out to other organizations. We've got, okay, Beth, I'm going to call you out. We've got Beth Bunnell here from the Queen Anne Community Council, just trying to reach out to a few other organizations around the city and help them understand what we've learned so they can also speak. When more of us speak, if one of us was just trying to talk to the city council, it wouldn't have worked at all. But when multiple people of us have talked to them, and I'll just say talk to them in a constructive way, it's allowed the space for us to have these conversations and to learn more. Hey, Beth. So I'm not sure if that was the question you asked, Jeff. That just was what came to mind when you talked about that.
That's good. Thank you.
I got to say, I don't even know how to do this. I just started 4 years ago saying it's not okay for Ravenna Park to become a trash heap. And it turned out that my neighbors and some other neighbors were more than happy to also jump on. And so from there, just being very methodical, very persistent, very open to hearing and continuing to move forward, but as a group, not individually. And we can make a difference.
Thanks, Theresa. Dawn, I'd like to jump to you, and I want to make sure to get to the success stories and case studies or success stories that you've had in your outreach work in Georgetown. I know you do a lot with emergency services, clothing, and food related. So if you could talk about that, that'd be great.
When you say success stories, I mean, obviously, like the food, the ID, those clothing, like that, those are immediate triage needs. Are you talking about like from start to finish, like this person is now housed and happy, or what exactly do you mean when you ask for a success story?
I'm thinking about you in your work and what Reach and the Evergreen Treatment Services have done, and what you've seen as successful interventions or successful work with people, just in your sphere.
Okay, so part of my job when I'm out in the field is identifying clients who meet the criteria for Reach intensive case management, doing a screening on those folks, and then bringing them to a screening committee, and then being able to do a warm handoff to introduce them to a case manager who has the capacity to do more intensive case management. I had a woman that I came across who was on 24-hour oxygen out in the field, and was constantly being admitted to the emergency department because she was not able to get her oxygen. And the provider for the oxygen tanks, because she lost a couple of them, they refused to provide any more for her, and there's just not that many of these. Moving forward, she was taken on as an intensive case management client. Her case manager bent over backwards trying to deal with this oxygen need, to the point where we actually had a machine that made oxygen in our office, because that was the only way we could provide oxygen for her. She is now housed. She is not being admitted to the emergency room anymore. She has been able to get off of 24-hour oxygen. But it took about a year from the time that I did that screening until, and during this whole time, she was trying to live outside with an oxygen machine, because we just didn't have any short-term availability for her. And she wasn't able to, most of our clients, my clients, a lot of them do not want to be in congregate setting shelters. So she just wasn't able to navigate that system. She didn't do well there, and we had to write it out for her and wait until she was able to get on the CEA housing list. I think one of the things that this highlights is that the CEA priority housing list for permanent supportive housing requires our clients to deteriorate to such an extreme point or degree that the medical costs involved to our society at large are so far outweigh what the cost would be if we could approach the housing support or availability way before people got to this point where their medical condition had left them almost at death's door, right? And in this case with this client, at death's door. So I think that, it's good to see that we have some new housing that's coming online, that the city is being willing to invest in. We just need so much more of that, and to be able to increase it so that we have quantity enough that the standards can be lowered to where we don't have to wait until a person has gotten so far gone that both their mental health and their medical it's moving mountains to help those folks recover at that point. So,
okay, thank you. Chris, how about you? What success stories do you have in your work?
Yeah, we definitely have some. One that comes immediately to mind was we encountered a young man in Belltown who was sleeping outside on the sidewalk, and we offered him a hygiene kit, some hand warmers, and just some other basic needs items that we have on us and that we hand out to folks. And as we got to know him and talk with him, it turned out that they already had a steady income coming in due to SSDI. They have chronic, persistent, severe mental illness, but they also had a desire to work part-time. And so it took us probably about 6 months. We had to help them get a Washington State ID. They had never had one before, so that took time because we had to get a Social Security card, a birth certificate, driver's abstract, and high school transcripts. We needed 4 supporting documents to prove his identity before we can get him a Washington State ID. So we went through that process, and then we were able to connect him with an organization formerly known as Millionaire Club, but Uplift Northwest. They were able to help find him sustainable part-time employment, and we were able to reconnect him with mental health services and move him into permanent housing. And not only that, but I think one of the best connections that we made for this individual was through a program called Seattle Clubhouse. It's a mental health clubhouse for individuals who suffer from chronic persistent mental illness, a place where they can go just to have some community and different things of that nature. You fast forward 4 months later, that person is still housed, that person is still working part-time, and they are still connected with Seattle Clubhouse. So I think that's one success story. Another one was an individual who is with a different agency. They reached out to us and simply said, hey, we just don't know how to get people Washington State IDs. Could you help this refugee family do that? And it was actually a pretty simple process, and just being able to make those connections happen and get them to the DOL to get their ID. Now they can actually start employment and should be moving to permanent housing next month. And so I think those are some of the success stories that we've had, not just from our own outreach, but also just by collaborating and partnering together with other service providers.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Back to Maureen. Do you have any success stories you'd like to share? Especially, I was thinking about your Safe Lots program or whatever you'd like to share.
Yes, absolutely. So the Safe Lot program, I don't know if I went into enough detail to actually explain what it is, and you may hear my 5-year-old screaming in the background, so I apologize for that. But we essentially, the car works as a shelter bed, and then we surround them with services. So there's a kitchen and washer and dryer and hygiene services. And then the Urban League meets with them for case management. And then the Temple Church provides a lot of resources too. And then our entire community will surround our folks with, drives and different things like that. So we really integrate them into our community. But one of their first clients was a single mom with 2 kids who worked for a childcare center, and she was housed within a week. But to know that those are the types of people that are homeless, they're working adults. And then, we talk about upstream services and what Don was saying about, people have to go so far down into trauma and crises before they get help. Childcare is an upstream program, and we pay people so terrible that they're living in their cars. But that was a success story, in that she got housed right away. We also had a pregnant teenager who was housed pretty quickly with Mary's Place. So it was only in our lot. She was 8 months pregnant. So she literally got housed right before she gave birth. And then kind of an unusual success story is a gentleman who lost his job after the pandemic working for a restaurant in the U District and ended up in our lot. And he has 2 part-time jobs, including with U Heights. But he doesn't want to live in a tiny house village, and he doesn't want to live in an apartment, and he wants to save his money and not pay Seattle rent. And even though the system doesn't always consider that a success story, I do, because it's what he wants. And I think that we need to ask people what they want, people with lived experience, versus thinking that we know what they want and they should be sheltered. And as some of the other panelists have said, congregate sites aren't always the best option for people in their cars. It might be their last form of autonomy. It's much more than transportation, but it could be what's getting them to work. It's a place to lock their belongings and sleep at night. It may allow them to not be separated from their families. So an East Side program at the United Methodist Church that's been around a long time serves women and families, and a lot of what they do with their Safe Lot is keeping families together so that they don't get separated. And then finally, I don't know where the story is going to go, but on the ride along this week, when we were on the south side of Seattle in Sodo, we went along a railroad track and met a woman who's not usually there because she was she'd been working full time. She took time off because she wanted to get off heroin and get on Suboxone. And she used the remaining gas in her car to go to a nonprofit health clinic, but went to the wrong location. And so we ended up driving her to the right location. And so, I don't know what's going to happen with her, but I do know that Jen Adams, the outreach worker, is going to go back and find out. And I was moved to tears by the situation. It was heartbreaking to see this woman, but it was also so heartwarming to see the outreach worker not just providing the transportation to the appointment, but saying, I am so proud of you. You have been working in your addiction for a year. And the woman it lit up. Her whole demeanor changed, just from the encouragement from this outreach worker. And she began to open up to us and say, I paid my taxes this year. I'm so proud of myself. And then she said, there is just one fucking roadblock after another. I have been trying to get housing for me and my son, and I have a prior eviction. And all I do is end up paying the application fees, but I never get housing. And she said that because she's been at work, that this was the first outreach worker that has stopped to ask how she was. And she immediately broke down in tears just because this woman asked how she was. And so, who knows where her story ends up, but just that day, I think, was a success.
Thank you, Maureen. I want to kind of jump back to Theresa. She had a success story on tent encampments. And I also wanted, Theresa, if you could address what Paula put in the chat about the lack of sufficient information coming from the city for those, the default response is to call 911, which is not the optimal solution. So how can we actually reach out for community organizations to get the best information from the city?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Paula. So I just want to mention a couple quick success stories, and actually I'm going to kind of point back to Chris on related to one of them. So we actually heard from Lehigh last night that they did an encampment addressing situation to a tiny house village down in South Seattle. So they were in a park. But these folks who are living outdoors, we see if there's more than just a single tent, often develop a community of their own with some kind of a local governance arrangement. That's the case for this encampment at 15th Northeast and Ravenna Boulevard. And so coming to these communities and really asking them what they want and what would work for them rather than imposing was what Lehigh described doing in South Seattle for the particular park. And that they reported that was really welcomed by the encampment. So that's just a third-hand story. Firsthand, I did hear from one of our organizers of the Ravenna pop-up kitchen pretty early on. And those folks in that service role do develop relationships with those either in their cars, like Maureen's talking about, or it's whoever comes up and wants the meal or needs other supplies. And we had, she told me about a woman who was sleeping on a bench at Green Lake, had a dog was stolen, was very upset, came to the pop-up kitchen, and that they were able to help her get into a tiny house village slot. And once she did that, she had a number of medical conditions that really needed to be addressed. So she started making appointments and began to really stabilize her health. And but my neighbor told me that as she started being connected with housing, they would go to look at these apartments. My neighbor would drive her there, and they were awful. They were dirty, they were filthy, there was broken, equipment in the apartment, and that just wasn't something that would be acceptable for a human person to live in. So that this information from my neighbor helped me to understand that it's really, really important. Just because we think there's housing out there, it may not be adequate housing. I wanted to echo that we're already investing a huge amount of money in caring for people by sending them to Harborview and that kind of thing, which is way more expensive than simply providing a humane solution of housing. I wanted to echo what Dawn said. And then as residents, our success story has been to continue to advocate for something to be done. So we engage with our council members. We just had a meeting with our first council member where we asked them to tell us what was going on back in NAV Team Days 2017. Then we met with Parks. Then we met with Seattle Police, and we also met with some of the mayor's office folks. So it doesn't take a lot to actually start to engage, but it does help if you have a community. So I think, Paula, you actually have a community up there on Queen Anne Hill that has done block watch stuff, and you're starting to do that. But the information is hard. It ends up being kind of a black box. And that's why we asked Lehigh to come talk to us, because they know firsthand what the bottlenecks are in getting the U District housing tiny house village. So for us, it's been, I've dedicated a fair amount of time to this, and then I provide the information to my community members, and I'm more than willing to partner with anybody else who in another community who'd like to do this. It's a little bit challenging. So thanks, Jeff.
Theresa. You mentioned Lehigh a few times, Low Income Housing Institute, and I see a comment from Ted about about the city investing in tiny home villages. And just a plug for next week's Civic Boot Camp, we've got the Deputy Mayor Six Killer, King County Council Member Zahile, and State Representative Ty who will be on the call. So you can ask them directly about their investment in tiny home villages. And just after this, we'll have a breakout session. And if you want to join Theresa's breakout session, ask her how she advocates and how she corresponds with the city to advocate for homeless solutions. Feel free to join Theresa. But I wanted, in the last just couple minutes, briefly, if you all could talk about how people could support you in your work. So Dawn, how could people support REACH and Evergreen Treatment Services?
So how could folks support REACH and Evergreen Treatment Services? I definitely think that the continued communication with our city council and our mayor's office, letting them know that the value of offering community service support with our unsheltered neighbors is shared amongst housed community members instead of the desire. I think a lot of times folks decide that they just don't want the problem to be on their front door. And so the complaints are being made and like, let's just push it down the street and kick the can. But that is definitely, I think we've proven it's not the solution. And that it is going to take more funds being allocated to community service organizations. I know that the city council has been real supportive in trying to make that happen some more this year. And we just need to see more of that. I think sometimes I get phone calls from members that are housed in our community, and they have like these really elevated expectations for like, yes, I will come down, I will outreach this person. I don't have the ability to put them in housing just because I've talked to them once, like these are like Chris was saying, like it really does take a long time to develop relationships with folks. People are reticent to engage a lot of times from their past experience, and a lot of times from having people make promises to them that they cannot keep or don't keep. And so being able to create a relationship with people and then work to help them figure out what it is they need and what they want to do. So I guess maybe also having some compassion for the fact that my job is not really to solve the housed members' problems. My job is my job is there to advocate and to support the person who's living unhoused. So I did have a bakery that called me, and they had somebody living right there on the corner, and all the trash was creating rats in the area for them, and that was a problem for the health department with them. And it wasn't my job to go out and make this person move. Ultimately, we were able to work with the bakery, and they actually provided a garbage can that was picked up each week, and they paid the tab on it because the city is not providing those garbage services, which I know has been mentioned multiple times. But being able to provide garbage services and hygiene stations, we have so few hygiene stations for a major city compared to where all of the other cities that have big homeless problems around this country. We are so far below the line of hygiene services that have become available. So advocating for those investments to be made, placing hygiene hand washing stations and leaving them there long-term, even brick and mortar sites being added around the city. COVID has definitely highlighted an increased need for that for sure. And then, other investments that can be made instead of just putting the Band-Aid on, but being willing to share in a long-term goal, and just having compassion and empathy for the folks that are living outside. But for the grace of God, there go every single one of us. And I'm seeing a big influx of new newly homeless people as a result of job loss from COVID. And these folks do not have any experience living on the street. So they are much more likely to be victimized as a result of not knowing how to protect themselves out there. So this is definitely a problem for all of our community members. These are our neighbors, and it is going to take an investment.
Thank you, Dawn. Well, if people want to talk to you more, we'll have a breakout session just a minute. Chris, any thoughts on how people could support your work? Just quick thoughts, if you don't mind.
No, absolutely. I'll keep them brief. I think Dawn did an excellent job covering those things. I think also too, just advocating for access to mental health care is vital. And I think too, just sometimes it's as simply as just saying hi to someone, someone who is experiencing homelessness, somebody saying hi and just holding a conversation and just, I have 3 young children, ages 6, 5, and 2, and we have to talk about how they're our neighbors and how sometimes our neighbors have tough days. And other days, it's okay for us to say hi to our neighbors and to be kind to them. So I'll just keep it at that.
Great, thank you, Maureen. Any thoughts?
It's hard to build. Those are all great ideas. I think just to reiterate the advocacy piece, to advocate to the elected officials for both short and long-term solutions. So we need more housing, but as Dawn said, we also need hygiene centers. We need more and some of the folks from the audience, we need more tiny house village in every neighborhood that offers a harm reduction approach. And safe lots are very similar to tiny house villages. They're temporary solutions. And I think that Seattle City Club has a great list of ways to donate, volunteer. We're looking for specific items for outreach workers. So if you want to do something tangible, we need winter gloves, socks, underwear, and bottles of water. So if you want to drop those off at U Heights, we typically have bins, but you can always contact me and those will be distributed throughout the city.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much to the panelists. I want to jump to the small group breakout sessions. Before I do, I want to invite Jennifer T., the Deputy Director of Facing Homelessness, to give a brief talk about what she does in Ballard at Facing Homelessness, and then each panelist will have a different breakout session. So if you participants are interested in talking to a specific panelist, feel free to do that. So Jennifer, are you there? Can you give us a little rundown?
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for inviting me today, Jeff, and it's just been really lovely listening to everybody. I'm sorry I couldn't join earlier. So my name is Jennifer T., and I work with Facing Homelessness. So our mission is basically to bring people into partnership to become involved with homelessness in whatever way allows them to apply their unique skills and talents. And so we have 4 programs where we're basically trying to provide an entry point for people to get involved. We know that there are a lot of people who want to do something about homelessness, but they are, for many different reasons, I'm not sure how to get started. And so we're kind of trying to provide a space where people can get started. And so we have a Facebook page where we tell stories with people in our community who are facing houselessness. And so that's one way people can kind of start to learn more about the different situations people are experiencing, and also recognize that there's any one of us could be in this situation, and start to sort of see the humanity as opposed to dehumanizing people who are in the situation. And then we have the window of kindness, which is more of a direct service setup where we are providing supplies, emergency supplies for people in our community in the U District. Well, anyone can come, but a lot of people are living in the University District. And we have volunteers who staff that window along with our staff. And so it's really about, providing materials, but it's also about conversation and connection. And, what somebody was talking about earlier about, hey, do you want a cup of coffee? Do you want to sit down? How's your day going? Spending a little bit more time getting to know people. And so we have a lot of people who come back day after day, week after week, because of those relationships. And then the Block Project is another one of our initiatives. We are building small homes in residential backyards around the city of Seattle to provide housing for people who are experiencing houselessness. And we have some, semi-supportive services that we're providing, and we partner with case management agencies on that project. And then the Just Say Hello campaign, which I think Chris mentioned, yeah, which is just basically trying to support community and getting out and making connections out on the streets and saying hello to people, and helping people to feel acknowledged when they may spend a whole day without anybody acknowledging them, and trying to build some relationships. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we do. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. And I also need to thank our sponsor, Alaska Airlines, for helping us put this whole program together. So again, thank you all very much. Please take care and stay safe and have a great day.